Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 44. Mental Health in Many Languages. Hizashi liked to consider himself a patient person. His life was a flurry of activity, yes, a constant ebb and flow of here and now, flitting from one place to the next as if he feared it might pass him by. But he was patient. Could be, anyway, though he found himself frustrated by stillness, by inaction. Hizashi prided himself on his ability to stop, look, and listen. People always looked to Shouta as the voice of reason, ever the pragmatist. But it was Hizashi who pulled the insomniac back from the brink whenever his work overtook him, and he pushed too hard towards a solution just out of his grasp. Thing was, the whole Suzuki-era business was really trying his nerves, and it was becoming more and more difficult to disguise it. Shouta could tell. Obviously, Shouta could always tell, but Hizashi had always been adept at hiding his true feelings. At putting on a good show so everyone would be laughing too damn much to notice anything out of place. Originally, it was what his therapist might call a coping mechanism, but into his hero career, he'd found that the skill was more helpful than not, and he'd managed to get it to the point where it didn't bite him in the ass too much. Shouta was always there. Even if Hizashi swept everything up beneath stupid outfits and ridiculous, swaggering persona, Shouta could always tell. So things didn't get bottled up as much as they used to. And Hizashi was doing his due diligence in clear and honest communication and emotional acceptance and practicing mindfulness. Maybe he needed to see his therapist again. But that was beside the point. Something was wrong, and it was wearing his patience dangerously thin. He needed to be doing something, anything to help. It was that burning instinct inside of him, that itch that led him towards becoming a hero in the first place. Do whatever good you can! Here, Hizashi was deeply afraid of causing more harm than good, and it was beginning to leave him restless and unsure. Small steps. That was always key. Forgo the bigger picture for just a moment and focus on the now. Suzuki-era was struggling in class, and while he was going to be patient and wait for her to ask for help, it was becoming increasingly apparent that would never happen. Caught in the flux of all of her many issues beginning to rear their ugly heads, this one seemed rather small. Which was why he would do his best to address it. To take it off the pile. Remove the burden, even if it seemed light in comparison to the rest. Suzuki hadn't fidgeted uncomfortably when he'd asked her to meet him in the teacher's lounge after class. Nor did she twitch or tug at her clothes when she stood at the open door, peering in with a polite greeting. He knew she fidgeted in class, though. Probably thought he couldn't see it. But Hizashi had a keen eye for that sort of thing, and he'd caught the way her hands bunched up the fabric of her pant legs, or her fingers drummed lightly against the side of her chair. Most notable, and a cause for most concern, he thought. On days where she was more obviously exhausted, he'd seen her hands clench into tight fists, nails leaving crescent marks against her palms, in what he assumed was an attempt to stay awake. Given what he knew, he really didn't like her doing that. Didn't like the idea of marks he couldn't see, faded pale and jagged across skin before they could be questioned. But Hizashi was not only patient, but he was also a good liar. So, when she peeked her head into the near-empty lounge and softly knocked on the doorframe, he smiled wide. "Hey there, listener! Come on in! I gotta set up on this table over here if that's all right.
That's fine, Sensei, she said. Far too out of character with how Shouta always described her. As she walked over, Hizashi caught her eyes flicking over to the other teachers scattered around the room. Snipe was still at his desk writing up some paperwork. Ectoplasm sitting by a window with a few ungraded tests in his lap. And Midnight appeared to be reading something in the corner. No one was paying much attention to them, although Snipe did glance up from his monitor when Suzuki sat down.
Oh, hey, kid. Your certification go through okay?
Right! The firearms certification. Yet another thing that was clearly driving Shouta crazy. Hizashi sighed softly, taking the opportunity of Suzuki's distraction to settle himself. One thing at a time.
At least Suzuki seemed to open up a little at the question, the barest genuine excitement entering her voice. Yes. Powerloader Sensei said everything's in order. Hatsume's working on the gear. I'm actually going to head over to the lab after this, probably. It's not a real gun, but I guess it could injure someone if you weren't careful. Snipe nodded thoughtfully.
That's the case with most weapons, I reckon. Just make sure not to take anyone's eyes out, and it should be fine.
Suzuki gave a light huff of amusement, lips twitching up for a moment. I'll do my best, Sensei. With a snort, Snipe turned back to his computer and resumed his work.
So,
said Hizashi, smiling brightly when she turned to face him.
You ready?
Suzuki tilted her head slightly to the side, expression painfully neutral. Ready for what, sir? Her lips pursed, the briefest irritation flitting across her face, before it settled once more.
Well,
Hizashi clapped his hands together, berating himself when she twitched backwards in what he assumed was an aborted flinch.
You're moving to the hero course, right? And that's probably really stressful. You know, dancing to a new beat and all that. So I figured I could help a listener out.
Help me with what?
School, lessons, all that stuff,
said Hizashi, waving his hand noncommittally.
Moving courses can be rough, so I'm here to make sure you have all the resources you need. Answer questions, help you with studying. Just make sure you're on track and aren't too stressed out. Dig?
Her expression remained even, but her voice took on a wary bent. Are you offering this to Shinsou as well?
Shit!
Hizashi laughed, and hoped it didn't come off as too nervous.
Of course! But, he's kind of been taking hero course lessons since pretty much the beginning of the year, and you haven't, so...
I'm capable, said Suzuki stiffly. I can catch up. I don't need to be coddled.
Man, he'd really been trying to step around this little attitude problem of hers, but it seemed like there was no use in confronting it anyway but head on.
Hizashi sighed, deflating slightly and pulling out a few papers from the brightly colored folders laid across the table.
Hey, listener, I know you haven't had the best few weeks, so it's totally understandable, but your grades are kind of slipping here.
I'm fine.
Yeah, see, I totally respect that. I get it, you know. I always want to get stuff done by myself. Don't want to, burden others and all that, but this is sort of what we're here for. If nothing else, can you do it as a favor to me? Please?
Suzuki stared down at the papers and textbooks, idly flipping open to a random page, before sighing far more heavily than anyone her age had a right to. Fine, but I don't need help.
Never said you did, said Hizashi cheerily. Thank God. He really hadn't wanted to pull out the old, "You're going to fail this class if you don't get your act together." But they've been getting dangerously close to that point. I feel like you're more comfortable with English, so you want to start there?
Suzuki just nodded warily, and they went to work. It seemed that initial hunch had been correct. As they tackled the first worksheet, it quickly became apparent that Suzuki was, in fact, fluent. And she could read and write well enough, which kind of threw his suspicion of dyslexia into a little bit of a flux.
Hey, listener, where'd you learn English?
She froze so briefly, he could have convinced himself he'd imagined it. Seemed like something useful to know. Lots of things are in English. Hizashi just hummed, looking over at Suzuki to find that she was still staring down at the worksheet.
Know any other languages?
A moment of hesitation, before she gave a brisk nod. A few. Some more fluent than others.
That's pretty impressive.
Suzuki actually ducked her head a little at that, voice becoming flustered. It's not really... Just, I'm pretty fast with languages. Or, I used to be. She added in a low mutter. She clearly wasn't used to the praise, which wasn't surprising.
Which ones?
He pressed.
Maybe we have some in common.
I don't want to bore you.
It's not boring,
said Hizashi with an emphatic shake of his head.
I love languages. Why do you think I'm the voice hero?
Because you're loud, muttered Suzuki. She froze again. This time Hizashi could see the tension in her shoulders. And if he looked hard enough, he could swear there was the briefest flash of fear on her face. That wasn't good. What the hell? Yeah, Shouta had told him some messed up stuff, but seeing it himself, up close, was a little bit...
One thing at a time.
Hizashi leaned back and threw back his head in laughter. Relief, lending it authenticity, once he caught Suzuki relaxing in her chair once more.
Yeah, I guess I am. But I do really love languages. It's just something about them, you know? I'm basically deaf.
He tapped at one of his hearing aids.
So maybe that has something to do with it? Communicating with other people? I don't know.
Suzuki stared at him with an almost unnerving intensity, before hesitantly bringing up her hands. I know sign language, she said softly, curling her fingers into shapes that echoed her words. JSL and ASL.
Wow! That's really cool!
Suzuki hastily turned her head to the side, as if to hide the way her lip quirked up ever so slightly. Thank you. It's not really... It's just something that's useful.
Anything else?
Well... She sighed, moving as if to wring her hands before laying them flat on her thighs. I speak and read Russian fluently. I have a pretty good grasp on Chinese, although sometimes it gets a little... and French. I can speak it, but reading is a little... Suzuki made a so-so motion with her hand. Oh, and Spanish. I know some German. It's not really a lot, but I can get by, and... My Arabic's probably a little rusty at this point, but...
Arabic?
Hizashi couldn't help the outburst, nearly clapping a hand over his mouth before he managed to calm himself.
What child knew that many languages? Unless her education was highly structured, which, given everything else, was more than a little concerning. God, this one thing at a time method was just unearthing brand new problems to be added to the pile.
Suzuki stared back at him, brow furrowing. Yes? It's a useful language?
Yeah, you're definitely right about that, listener,
said Hizashi, trying not to sound too flustered.
That's, quite the repertoire you've got there.
It's nothing special, really.
Hizashi tried not to stare at her incredulously.
He really did.
That's actually pretty special, listener. Most people don't know that many languages.
Now, it was Suzuki's turn to look incredulous. Oh, are you sure? That's just putting yourself at a disadvantage. Doesn't seem very logical, especially with hero work.
Is she spending too much time with Shouta, or is this just the reason he's taking an interest in her?
Hizashi wondered dryly, before clearing his throat.
No, that's actually something pretty special you got there. Even I only know, well, let's see.
Hizashi counted off of his fingers as he spoke.
English, obviously, but also Mandarin, Spanish, Italian, some German, a smidge of Russian, like a little bit of French, but probably only enough to offend someone. Oh, and sign language. ASL and JSL, like you.
When he brought his focus back to Suzuki, she was staring at him, expression bordering on pensive.
Got something on your mind, listener?
She hesitated before she spoke. Well, if people don't usually know those languages, then, well, maybe we could... It's not, She paused, taking a deep breath that seemed to banish the signs of uncertainty from her face. It would be beneficial for both of us if we practiced with each other.
Hizashi tried not to sound too eager. You want to talk to each other in different languages? To stay fresh?
If that's all right with you, of course, she said hastily. I don't want to impose, I just thought it would be mutually—
Of course!
Hizashi beamed.
That sounds fun!
Suzuki relaxed again, a soft smile on her face. Yeah, it, kind of does. They continued looking over the worksheets, atmosphere far more relaxed than it had been before. Every so often, Suzuki would slip an English word or two in there, always eyeing him cautiously when she did so, as if she were testing the waters. Each time, Hizashi made sure to give her his brightest smile and respond enthusiastically in kind, until eventually they were communicating almost entirely in English. It was cute, honestly, and she had been right. It was nice to practice the language with someone who was actually fluent, as opposed to the halting conversations he sometimes had with his students. But it was also, well, someone had taught her to be wary, to suspect repercussions for something he'd already told her was not only okay, but a fantastic idea. The situation soured pretty quickly when they moved on to history.
Well, is there a time period you're more confident in?
Hizashi asked after a long few minutes of them bashing their heads against the textbook.
Or maybe one you feel a lot less confident about?
Suzuki shook her head fiercely, long since having dropped back into Japanese. I don't know any of this.
Any of it?
Hizashi tried not to sound accusatory, but she still flinched. No, Suzuki sighed, warily pointing to a passage in the textbook on the formation of the Hero Commission. I know about this. I know how it works. I know the function, how it affects society. I know the members of the board right now, but I don't... She let out an inarticulate noise of frustration.
It's the specifics?
Suggested Hizashi gently, and she scowled with another shake of her head. I can do specifics. just not... These dates. I know I was taught this, but I just can't... I can't remember it. It doesn't stick.
Well, do you have any study methods you usually use?
Suzuki wrinkled her nose at him. Study methods?
Yeah. You know, like flashcards.
Her blank stare was not reassuring.
Wow. And he'd thought Shouta had his work cut out for him. Here, let me show you.
He fumbled around for an index card and a marker, scrawling the Hero Commission on one side and a brief description of its founding on the other.
See? So you just have to flip this sucker over after giving it your best guess, and then eventually you'll get the right answer without having to peek at the definition.
Suzuki bristled, staring down at the flashcard with barely restrained disgust. I don't need that. I'm not a child. I can do it myself. I just need to be better.
Well, that's not exactly a helpful attitude now, is it?
I can do it, she snapped, pulling the textbook towards her. I can do it. I just need to focus. If I can make it stick, then it'll be fine.
You can't brute force your way through this, said Hizashi as gently as he could muster. It's not shameful to use some tricks that might help you out.
I should be able to do it, she muttered, as if to herself. My mind works. It isn't broken. I can...
No one said that.
Hizashi's voice was just a little too sharp, and he reined himself in before continuing.
Your mind isn't broken just because you have trouble remembering a few pesky dates. I forget things all the time.
It's not just the dates. Suzuki was staring at the textbook, the shadows beneath her eyes suddenly looking that much darker. It's everything. Nothing sticks anymore. I don't know why. It should, but it doesn't. She sounded exhausted, beaten low by a problem that wasn't her fault, like she had already been defeated and just had to learn to accept it.
Do you remember when you started having this problem?
Suzuki paused, finger tapping at the page. Yes. When it became obvious that she wasn't going to elaborate, Hizashi pressed.
And?
And what?
When did it start?
She made a noncommittal noise, and Hizashi felt frustration build in his chest before he forced it down.
Okay, we don't have to talk about that, then. How about, were you injured or something?
She snorted. No.
Great! Okay, was it a certain age? Just, you woke up one day like, poof! Memory issues.
I thought you said we don't have to talk about it.
I did say that.
Suzuki tilted her head, eyes suddenly wide. Were you lying to me?
What? No, I'm not.
Hizashi cut himself off, feeling that telltale tingle in his throat that meant his quirk was threatening to break free. In the brief moment it took to wrestle it back under control, he realized she hadn't directly questioned him like that throughout their entire conversation, and that this was the first time she'd actually pushed against his inquiries, instead of shrugging them off. And the way she pushed, it felt targeted. Like she knew exactly what to say to make him back off, to get flustered and drop the subject. What was the word Shouta had used? Manipulative. Hizashi did not like the idea of viewing an obviously traumatized child as manipulative. But there was certainly a point to be made there. He'd been in the foster system. He knew the kinds of coping mechanisms children took on in order to survive. Some of them got mean, dedicated to beating the world into submission before it overcame them. Some of them got quiet, learned to be small and unnoticed, safe in the knowledge that nothing could hurt them if no one knew they were there. Some got sneaky. Hizashi felt like he had probably begun to fall into that camp until he was adopted. And some of the old habits were still tough to break. They learned to say exactly what needed to be said, to do what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. Hizashi had been loud, yes, but it was a smokescreen for his true intentions. He had wanted people to know him as the loudmouthed class clown, happy and clumsy, and occasionally obnoxious, but in a way that was ultimately endearing. It was a mask that kept people from getting too close, and could instantly solidify him as a staple of any new school he ended up in. He'd desperately wanted people to like him too. But it seemed like Suzuki had the opposite problem in that regard. Whenever anyone got too close, it was like she instinctively pushed them away. Hizashi took a breath, tapping out a soothing rhythm against his leg before trying again. Hey, Suzuki, I'm not going to judge you for how you learn, you know. Everyone thinks differently. Look, I'll stop asking questions about whatever it was that happened, but nothing happened.
Yeah, I totally get that. Loud and clear.
He flashed a big thumbs up to mask the strain in his smile.
But that doesn't mean we can't try to improve now, right? This kind of thing isn't a straight line sort of deal. Lots of twists and turns. Sometimes we have to help ourselves out. Cut ourselves a little slack.
She scoffed lightly at that, closing the textbook. Thank you, Yamada-sensei. I'll consider your advice.
Fantastic. That didn't sound disingenuous at all. I'm serious, little listener.
Hizashi tried to catch her eye.
I'm here to help. All of us are here to help. Yeah? You know, making sure you can grow and learn is kind of our job. I promise you that there's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's totally normal for people to have trouble in school. Nothing wrong with it.
UA is one of the most prestigious hero schools in the country, said Suzuki, a steel set to her eyes when she met his gaze. I'm sure if a student doesn't make the cut, then they will be swiftly dealt with. Hizashi furrowed his brow.
If someone isn't putting in the effort, maybe. But you're putting in too much effort. There are resources to—
Are you suggesting I slack off? Take shortcuts?
No! You have teachers who'd be super willing to help you out if you just let them.
Hizashi felt his frustration welling up again, tugging at his voice. I don't need help, she said stiffly. I can do this. You don't have to. Hizashi threw up his hands.
I want to! I want to help you. I'm a hero, yeah? That's kind of what we do.
You can't help everybody. She said it so softly that for a moment Hizashi wasn't sure if he heard her right.
What?
Sensei, I kind of have a meeting I have to get to. Can we continue this later?
Suzuki, you have to.
She paused, giving him that look again. Please? Hizashi sighed.
Yeah. Go on, listener.
Thank you.
Wow. If he didn't know any better, Hizashi would say she was in a hurry to get out of there.
The instant she closed the door behind her, he leaned back in his chair with a groan, glancing up when he heard Namuri close her book with a snap. Well, that was painful. she said. "Normally I'm all for masochistic tendencies, but you've really—"
Where do I go from here?
Hizashi began tidying up the papers, stuffing worksheets back into folders, and stacking the textbooks neatly.
I am trying to help her, but she doesn't want me to.
Some people you can't help.
Ectoplasm shuffled through his graded exams and stood with a sigh.
She's in my class now, right? Is math a problem for her as well?
Yes, kind of. There are some concepts she's solid on, and some she just can't seem to remember. She can do mental math very well, but she'll just do the wrong problem sometimes. Like she read something completely different.
Dyslexia? Offered Namuri, and Ectoplasm hummed his agreement as he walked towards the door.
Yeah, see, that's what I thought. But it doesn't really seem to add up. She's great at English, which, I mean, she's fluent, so that makes sense. But she can also read just fine. But she also doesn't understand what a participle is, no matter how many times I explain it to her.
Sounds like a memory problem,
said Ectoplasm.
Maybe some sort of developmental issue. Based on how she was talking, it could be physical trauma. Something she doesn't want to go into too much detail about.
Maybe,
said Hizashi hesitantly.
Could someone with Regeneration Quirk even have physical trauma like that? Or would the brain just bounce back?
Well, let me know if you figure it out, because I'm dealing with enough headaches already. Ashido and Kaminari definitely need remedial classes, and Kirishima would too, if he wasn't studying with Bakugou so much.
Ectoplasm left the lounge, leaving Namuri, Snipe, and an exhausted Hizashi, who flopped onto the couch with another groan.
How does someone with memory problems know that many languages?
He grumbled into the couch. Namuri shrugged. Learned them before the problem started?
Could've, I guess. I mean, the earlier the better for languages, right?
She's a first year?
Asked Snipe, turning away from his monitor.
Pretty young, but I think if she had any issues before now, her middle school would have picked them up. That ain't on her transcript?
There's nothing on her transcript,
muttered Hizashi.
Squeaky clean.
Snipe let out a snort of laughter.
Yeah, okay, sure.
You want to check?
Nah, I'll take your word for it. Her family rich or something?
Hizashi blinked, lifting his face off the couch to stare at Snipe.
What? I don't know. Why?
'Cause that's the only way that kid has a clean record. And come on, rivalry? In the city? That's a rich kid's sport if I've ever seen one.
I don't know.
If Suzuki had been wealthy, she certainly wasn't anymore. And he'd think her parents would throw more of a fuss about their missing daughter. Would have the resources to find her. Memory problems can be a symptom of PTSD, muttered Namuri. Hizashi looked up sharply, to find her already staring back at him.
Really?
Wait, PTSD? Am I missing something here?
Hizashi waved him away.
Not now, Snipe. Anything else?
Namuri pulled out her phone and began to scroll through something. I mean, a lot of things. Drugs and alcohol. Underlying mental illnesses like depression, sleep deprivation. Oh, and would you look at that? Apparently iron deficiency anemia. Wild. Okay, well, I'm hoping it's not drugs, said Hizashi. Nemuri rolled her eyes. Obviously, we're hoping it's not drugs. God, Hizashi. Honestly, I'd hope she doesn't have any of the problems on this list, but I doubt that.
High schoolers are sleep-deprived a lot, I guess, said Snipe. Still feel like I'm missing half the deck here.
Then find another poker table, said Nemuri, with the beginnings of a smirk. Snipe raised his hands with a chuckle, rising from his chair.
All right, I can tell when I'm not wanted. I'll take my leave.
Nemuri watched him close the door, before returning her sharp gaze to Hizashi. Suzuki definitely has depression. Probably. Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, he hadn't even considered it. But now that she mentioned it, the signs were all there. Although I'm not sure we should be diagnosing a student based off of WebMD. Reliable for decades, Hizashi. But that's not the point, said Nemuri, waving her phone around. This isn't just the internet. I have a goddamn counseling degree, and all of this sounds really familiar. The way she's acting is just... I can't put my finger on it, but I swear. Is it abused children you're thinking of? Because that's kind of the situation, isn't it? Well, yes, but there's something else too. Something that's... It was something specific. God, this is infuriating. Wow, I guess you know how Suzuki feels now. That girl needs a therapist, Nemuri snapped. She needs one a year ago, but now would also be nice. Shouta says she won't see one. What does Shouta know? So far, he's just managed to get her a firearms certification and a maiming by icicles at the sports festival. Not really his fault, but fair. Nemuri sighed. Look, I get that this is his project or whatever, but this is starting to get out of hand. Starting to? I'm trying to be nice, she said sharply. It's a little difficult at the moment. I think you're right, but I also don't know how to actually deal with it. What can we do? Get her a therapist. She won't see one. Then force her to. You and I both know that won't go over well. Best case scenario, she goes and acts all spiteful about it, and it's a complete waste of time. Worst case, she freaks out and refuses to talk to any of us ever again. You two have a lot of faith in a 15-year-old's ability to avoid us. Shouta said— Enough about what Shouta said. I want to hear what Hizashi has to say. Fine, snapped Hizashi, leaping to his feet with a scowl. Fine. I say that Suzuki is a time bomb. When she blows, not if, when, it's going to be catastrophic for her and everyone around her. Shouta thinks we should wait, keep an eye on her until she comes to us. But I think that's never going to happen. I know people, Nem, and that kid will die before asking for help, which is a little problematic because apparently she can't. I say she's got a fucking Jenga tower of issues, and we need to be careful of what we deal with at any time, because one wrong move could bring the whole thing crashing down in one big pile of awful. I don't know what to do. Shouta doesn't know what to do. Even Principal goddamn Nezu doesn't know what to do but wait. There was a buzzing in his throat, and Hizashi paused to let it hum a soft tune against his sternum, to push his quirk back down until his ribs were trembling with it. Fuck. He really needed to talk to his therapist. If you think she won't come to us, said Nemuri, more softly than before, and you think she's going to self-destruct eventually, then what will waiting accomplish? Why not act now? Hizashi took a shuddering breath, steadying himself.
Because if we wait, maybe we can get a better idea of what we're dealing with.
And that's helpful how? We know what we're dealing with. It's a traumatized kid who—
We don't know! 9 languages, Nemuri. She knows 9 languages. That's not normal.
Some people teach their children—
9 languages? Including Arabic?
A lot of people speak Arabic, muttered Nemuri. It could be useful, especially if you're going into business.
Do you know how different all those are? Japanese to English to Russian to Arabic? Those are all completely different alphabets. I don't see how a child could have the attention span for that, especially one with memory issues.
Maybe her family moved around a lot? Maybe she was just exposed to a lot of different cultures, different schools.
She doesn't know what flashcards are, Nemuri.
Homeschooled.
More concerning.
Nemuri threw her hands up into the air. Okay, you've made your point. We don't know what's going on. Hizashi sighed, sinking back onto the couch.
I just don't want to make it worse. I want to help too, you know. Short of kidnapping her, there isn't a lot to be done here.
Well?
No.
Aw, you're spending too much time with Shouta, said Nemuri with an exaggerated pout. Hizashi huffed.
I would sure hope so.
Just because you're together doesn't mean you have to catch his wet blanket disease.
We aren't kidnapping the little listener, even if that might solve a lot of our problems,
he added in a low mutter, mostly to himself. Nemuri grinned. Isn't that basically what Shouta's doing anyway? I mean, that's pretty much what this whole intern thing is, right? He laughed.
Well, when you put it like that.
Nemuri chuckled as well, before her expression turned a little more grim. Seriously though, Hizashi, I know you're stressed about this. We're all stressed about this. If you really think there's nothing we can do but wait, then I'll wait with you. Hizashi shot her a smile.
Thanks, Nem. Really.
Yeah. She waved him off distastefully. We're going to have to teach that child how to use flashcards, though, aren't we?
Oh, definitely.
Hizashi slammed his face back into the couch.
And it's going to be awful.
Great. Looking forward to it.
End of chapter 44.